Today is the final video series of Practical Conditional Access, where I give you tangible recommendations on how to use conditional access to secure your environment. Today's goal is all about device-based access, filtering access to appropriate situations when devices are in place. Because MFA is great and is a fantastic baseline to help secure your environment, but it's just a baseline. We need to be doing more than that to help protect our environment from inappropriate access that our users are doing. So today I'm going to look at how you can ensure that corporate devices are being used and only access from corporate issued devices. Because nothing's more terrifying than when you realize that the end user has hit that OneDrive sync button and downloaded everything out of that corporate SharePoint or corporate OneDrive to their personal laptop. They MFA'd in, but now all of your data that you thought was protected in the cloud is on a unmanaged laptop with who knows what security controls in place. So today, I'm going to show you a set of CA policies that I call the Secure Endpoint, which is all about filtering access down to corporate issued devices and putting appropriate controls when not accessing those devices. So that being said, let's get into it and let's look at the Secure Endpoint. So as always, I always like to start with a plan when creating our conditional access policies, and today's is no different. This is the goal of this secure endpoint set of policies. The first thing we want to do is we want to take some large swaths and separate out corporate devices versus personal devices. There may be some scenarios where you want end users to use some personal devices, but we want to put some controls in place on it. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to set up a series of policies that are going to help limit those controls and give you some flexibility for some allowances. So we're going to separate out some controls that you could combine just to help it make it a little easier for you in the long run to do it. This is the set of policies that we're going to do. We're going to do one that's called the baseline for everything, and that's your traditional MFA type policy, locking it in. We're going to do one that blocks legacy authentication because, you know what, in reality, we shouldn't be using that anymore in most of our environments, or it should be very filtered down, such as, hey, there's that one printer in our network that needs it, and only that one printer can do legacy auth. From there, we're going to look at building out those device-based policies. I like to separate this into three sets of policies, one for Windows 10 devices, one for macOS devices, and then one for mobile devices. And to help support end users that are working and need to work from a non-corporate issued device, we're going to make some allowances for that. We're going to give them the ability to access on a non-corporate device, but we're going to put some controls in place to limit what they can do on that non-corporate issued device. So we're going to use Defender for Cloud Apps, and we're going to proxy their connection on an unmanaged device and make sure that they are properly controlled. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop them from downloading from that non-corporate issue device. So they can't download Excel files, they can't download emails. If they go to Salesforce, they can't download, a bunch of Reqs from Salesforce or something like that. So that's the control that we're going to put in place. And then to top it all off, we're going to add in some risk-based MFA just for good measure to make sure that we're not missing anything. Okay, so that's the kind of high level of the policy. And of course, just like any of our other policies that we've done, we also have an Excel spreadsheet to go along with today's design. And so if you want to look at this more in depth before implementing it, you can use this Excel spreadsheet, which granularly shows all of those options that we're going to configure. Okay, so that's kind of the design idea, and we'll get into each of the details of this as we go. But I just want to give you the high level of what you're getting yourself into when we start implementing this set of policies. So now that we have a decent enough plan, let's get into creating our set of policies. I do want to say terms and conditions do apply in this video. We have some stuff that we're going to be using that's pre-set up. I'm not going to go through all of the setup process for everything I'm using in this technology stack, But here are the things that we are taking advantage of. We have modern authentication enabled. We have the combined registration experience enabled. We're also going to be looking at, for Windows 10 devices, hybrid Azure AD join and Intune management devices. So you do want your devices in those states to be able to take advantage of this sets of policies. For Mac devices, we're going to use Intune management as the control mechanism of that. So you do want to practice enrolling your devices in Tune, or just have an understanding that that will be the requirement for Mac devices. For mobile devices, we're going to take advantage of both MDM and application management policies. So we're going to either do a full lockdown of the device or just application controls. And I'll show you the difference there of that when we get to that section. Finally, I am going to be using some E5 technologies. The last 3 set of policies in this work set, this design, use E5 technology. So you can take advantage of this still, even if you don't have E5. You'll just want to make some tweaks, like blocking in those scenarios instead of using like a session policy that I'm going to show you. And so that is it. So let's get started and let's make this set of policies. So in my environment, I have some existing CA policies. So what we're going to do is we want to leave those intact. I'm not going to start fresh and clear out everything, but to make sure we get a good solid test of this, we're going to use a security group to exclude these, to make sure we're getting a clean results when we're doing our testing. So let's go ahead and set up a group for this. And here we go. We're going to make a cloud security group because that way it's a little faster. If we need to move people in and out of it, we can. And for the members, I'm just going to pre-fill in one test user in my environment. And so I recommend testing on not your account, but a separate user account. And we're set. Now, as part of this, I'm going to go ahead and back to all my conditional access policies, and I'll exclude that group from being in this set of policies, just again, so that I get a clean results. I'm only going to do it for one of these policies because this is the one that's really affecting this user. But you should do it on any of the other policies. Exclude this testing group so that we get it nice and clean. Okay. So let's go ahead and then start with policy 1. So in this case, our baseline for this deployment. So let me show you what that's going to look like in here. So group selected. Of course, we're going to use that new group that we just did. And all cloud apps is what we're going to target. The design of this policy is a very broad one. This is the, again, baseline. So this ensures that we are affecting all of the accounts that are in use here. So I am going to do this set of policies. This is kind of like my catch-all policy, to make sure that I am securing this in some way here. And so we're going to go ahead and turn this on. And the control here is I'm just requiring some control to be put in place on our devices. So to access our environment, we are going to allow access only if there's multi-factor or one of these device-based access policies. So to require a device to be marked as compliant, hybrid join, approved client, or approved app protection policies. So to access our environment, you're going to need one of those scenarios in place with this baseline to continue to access our environment. Pretty good there. Again, it's designed to be very broad, just to catch a lot of errors. I'm not trying to be overly filtered here, just because there's things that we don't know. There might be a new gap that comes out with the CA policies. So the baseline is there to just kind of gap fill everything possibly out there. Okay. So that's policy number 1. Policy number 2, again, just in general, always a good idea to do block legacy auth. And so we're going to do the same thing with this one. Plug that in, target the groups. And just like our previous videos where we targeted, legacy auth, we're going to do the same control mechanism here. So client apps, only target these legacy ones here. Obviously, you do need to test that to make sure that you're not using it. But for the most part, hopefully you are, and we're good to go. So that's policy 2. If you watched the video I did previously, it covers legacy auth. You'll also notice here in my design, I have a couple of things that I do that I think are helpful. You might want to consider it. So for any type of group set of policies where it's targeted to our group, I usually use a squiggly bracket to say, hey, this is the group that's in targeted. And then I use standard brackets for the control mechanism of what it is. And then after I do a little bit of a descriptor for it. So that helps me high level when I'm looking at my policies to realize, oh, this one's blocking, this one's requiring MFA, or doing something else. So you'll notice that as I go through these policies, I have it kind of written down that way. All right. So moving on to the third policy in our group, and this is where we get into some of the more interesting controls here. So in this case, I am going to be requiring MDM or hybrid join for Windows 10 devices. In this case, in changing how I do my access on this, I'm going to come in and show you that. Let's just build it instead of talking about it in the script here. So there we go, Windows 10 access. I guess it could be Windows 11 access now. Probably should update that. In this case, I come in and select filters on these apps. So these are going to be your high risk apps that are needed to support. So I'm going to target Office 365. And then usually I'll do things like my VPN, all right? If I have a Fortinet, I'll add that in, or a Palo Alto or something like that. Any of the apps that you are more concerned about, I usually put them in here as that targeted set of controls because I want that control in place. You might not like that policy. That's fine. You can switch to all cloud apps and that can work perfectly fine for you. Just if you do switch to all apps, you need to be concerned about or take care in the other things that can't support the controls that we're going to put in place. Specifically, one common one that you need to do is look at excluding Intune enrollment in your environment, right? You can't have a policy in place, or it's really easy to design a policy in place that says everything needs to be Intune joined if it's accessing our environment. And you have a policy in place that blocks the Intune enrollment. So if you're going to do all cloud apps, make sure you're testing things like Intune enrollment, or if you're using Jamf, make sure you're testing Jamf enrollment to make sure you're not blocking that enrollment process. Otherwise, you won't be able to get your devices into the state so that the control can actually work. So just a word to the wise there, something to think about there. In my case, again, I'm going to target Office 365 as a good test. Okay. All right. So that being said, let's go down and look at the rest of our controls. We're going to target Windows and we're going to target the desktop app clients of this. So again, the idea with this one is I really want to be focused on locking down the devices in my environment to only be accessing from thick client if it's managed by us. And so in this case, we're going to do that using this control mechanism here. So again, you'll see this one multiple times. I'm going to target mobile app and desktop clients. So that's the Outlook client, that's the Teams client, that's the all the thick clients that Microsoft offers should be in this scope here. And that's kind of the goal with this one. The grant in this case, we're going to switch it from multi-factor to hybrid Azure AD join or compliant as in Intune, right? And so I'm going to do one of these controls. If you only have hybrid Azure AD join, you might only want to do that one. If you do only have, Azure AD join and are doing Intune, you might only want to do that one. And you do need a compliance policy to make this work for your environment, whether that be a very scope policy or no risk on the device and a firewall's on, or you can just do the checkbox that says, if it's managed by us, it's compliant. Up to you. Matt Sozman has a great set of videos on this, all about designing those CA policies. And I'll put a link in the video on that as well. Okay. So that's the third set of policies there. The fourth one we're going to do is almost identical, but in this case, we're going to target the macOS a little differently. This gives us a little bit more flexibility when we're doing our policy design. So if you ever run into a situation where an executive needs to be excluded from this because they have a Mac device, you can get a little bit more granular and say, oh, for that executive, it's this Mac device. Again, same idea. I'm going to just target the Office 365 apps. But again, make a note of that in your environment. You might want to target more. Okay. Same idea. Device platform is the first thing we're going to look for. And I'm going to target macOS, client apps. And again, desktop client. And in this case, Mac can't be hybrid Azure AD joined. So we're only going to allow them to access those thick client apps if the device is marked as compliant, as in Intune managed. I guess it doesn't have to be always Intune managed, but it does have to be a MDM connected environment. So if you are using Jamf, AirWatch, they have a connector to Intune that can pass device compliance to your endpoints. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. If you are using some of those third-party MDMs, they have some really slick connectors that allow you to connect them up and still do device compliance this same way, even if you are using AirWatch or whatever solution out there for Macs. Okay. All right, fourth policy down. And now let's get into the mobile device policies. Mobile device is probably the #1 area that you're going to want control over when it comes to devices. And in my case, I'm going to do MDM or MAM in this policies. So here we go. Let's go and configure that. Same idea again. I'm going to target these select apps. I think you can actually, I don't think it will break anything if you did all cloud apps in this scenario, because I think the Authenticator and onboarding app are automatically excluded on mobile devices. So that can be helpful. Device platform, we're going to select all 3 of the device platforms just for full coverage. I don't know if anybody's actually using Windows Phone out there, but it's an option. So let's target it with these policies. And again, clicked off. And again, client apps, just going to be doing these 3 here. And in this case, for this, I'm going to be doing marked as compliant, approved client, require app protection, and I'm going to be doing one of these set of policies. So the reason why I do this is I don't want anyone accessing my environment on a non-controlled device. So for me, that means it could be Intune compliant and I could have full management of it. And that's the MDM part of it. Or I'm okay with them accessing on a personal device if I don't have full control, but I'm only going to allow them to access using the Outlook Thick client on their phone. That way I can have an app protection policy that comes in and says, no, it's only this. So if your end users argue with you on, hey, I want to use the full Apple Mail app, well, you have some area of doing that. You can do it, but you're going to get full management of the device. As in, if the end user's phone gets stolen, you have the power to wipe out your corporate data. Same idea with the MAM apps. Built into the MAM app is the ability to wipe out just the corporate amount of data that's on their corporate device. And so that's a really nice set of controls to put in place, a good way to put that in and have management over it. And so that's how I have this one designed, because I like people using their mobile device if they want to, but I want my data controlled by me. Okay. All right. So that's the device set of policies. So that's the 3 device policies. Now we get into the advanced stuff, right? Because all of these policies were targeting essentially the thick client apps. What about when people are accessing the web browser? People can do a lot through the web browser. There's a lot of action that they can do from there. And so we're going to put that in place to manage that web interaction and put some controls in place. And this gives a little bit of flexibility to your end users. If they need to work on a mobile device or work from a non-corporate issued device, they have some options, but in this case, they're going to have some corporate controls on them. So some compensating controls to make sure that that access is legitimate. Again, so we'll show you what this does as we target this. So let me put this up, make sure I configure it correctly. Perfect. So in this case, client apps, we're not going to do any device filters. or any of those platform filters up there, we're going to simply target the browser. So all browsers. And then we're going to come into filters for device. So the advanced filtering option, and we're going to exclude specific device properties here. So is compliant equals true. That's the first one I want to do. Device. Trust type. All right, so this policy is designed to, Azure AD joined, come in and look at 3 options for these devices to make sure they're in this trusted device. So it basically includes, all browser sessions and excludes the following 3 types of device. If the device is compliant, that's simply that MDM type control. If the device is hybrid Azure AD joined, again, same idea, but it's that hybrid joined. Or if the device is Azure AD joined, again, same controls here, and you can put that in place. You might want to not do this one if you have full device compliances, but for a lot of my environments, I'm not fully ready to do device compliance, so this is about the same thing. And adjust as you go to make it work how you want. So that's the filter and how we're going to target it. But the control in this place, or what we're going to use, is this advanced option here, conditional access app control. And we're going to use the built-in block download option for my end users. And this does require a little bit of setup, which again, I'm not going to get into in this policy, but this is going to say, hey, you're accessing from a non-corporate issued device. Well, you can access our environment, but we're going to have a compensating control. You can't download from our environment. You can do everything that you want in the portal. You can update Salesforce. You can update, email, SharePoint lists, all of those things. But if you try to download, it's going to be blocked. And that's the heart and soul of these set of policies in here, and what we're going to take advantage of this. Now, that being said, because I have introduced some additional, filters on this, I like to augment these policies with some risk-based add-ons to these better policies. And these last 3 policies, again, I will mention use E5 technology. And so if you came into this scenario and said, hey, I don't have E5, but I want to still use this, all you would do in this policies is switch this from block download to just block access entirely in that scenario. And that might be appropriate for you, or, test it out with a few extra licenses of E5 technology, see if that really helps your deployment. It's really slick. And I'll show it to you in the end when this policy is all said and done. All right, so last one to add in some risk-based access policies, we're going to use the last 2 set of policies. So in this case, in a high-risk scenario for an end user, holistic health, we're going to reset their password. And then the final one is if the end user is risky, we're also going to re-up their MFA in this scenario. So let's go ahead and add those in real fast. And then we'll get into some testing. Again, same idea, target our users and groups. All cloud apps. And this is where we're going to do, in this case, it's a user risk. So we're going to target the user risk section, and we're going to only target if the end user is high risk. Usually this is almost always end user is compromised. If I see a user that is in the high risk state, it's like 99% true positive they have been compromised. And so let's just tell the system to solve that problem. Don't wait for a human. We're going to require a password change if they're in that state. And then to make this happen, we are going to make sure that this sign-in frequency with this happens every time. This forces the lockout of that token so the end user doesn't, somehow still get a risk state and then bypassed. So you need to make sure if you're doing a risk-based policy, always set that sign-in frequency to every time. If you use the policy templates up here, it actually does it by default for you. So let's now show the sign-in risk policy. And again, this is my recommendations for this. You might need to adjust this to your own risk tolerance for these type of policies. But this one's worked pretty well for me and all of the other deployments I've done. And so try it out. Let me know if it works for you. So again, I'm going to target all cloud apps. conditions. We're not doing user risk, we're doing sign-in risk this time. So we're going to come into this, and I like targeting high and medium sign-in risk. And the control in this case is going to be require multi-factor authentication. And again, same idea, we want to target sign-in frequency and set it to every time. And the idea with this one is if something gets weird about their sign-in, something gets odd, well, we're going to re-require them to MFA in that scenario. Maybe there's something that's untrustworthy about their device. Well, we're going to come in and say, well, I don't care that maybe it's trusted. This is an over-the-top policy. The last two are over-the-top policies of everything else that we did to help ensure that the trust is there, and we're not just, blindly going into those policies and saying, it's managed. Totally fine if they're doing something malicious. This is going to come in over the top of that and make sure that we're being secure. So there we go, folks. That is the total design of this policies. And now we just need to test. So let me get my environment pre-set up to do this testing. And let me enroll some devices and show you what the user experience is you can expect in this design. All right, so we switched environments and now we're in an environment that has devices joined to it. And so here we can see the end user experience on a corporate issued device that's being managed by us. End user can access outlook.office365.com and can do everything that they normally would be expected to do. I can read my emails, I can go into it and I can hit, download, I can share things, I can do whatever I want in my environment and I'm good to go. Right? I can also come in and hit that wonderful OneDrive sync button and download and connect this up. If I'm in Teams, I get the full rich experience that I would want to do. And it's pretty much underwhelming. It's exactly what you expect the end users to do. No controls put in place to block them. The nice thing is the end user does get automatically signed in this case. I'm using Windows Hello for Business in this environment, so it's a really clean end user experience. They're on their corporate issue device, they're signed in, no friction involved here. One note I will mention, if you allow Chrome in your environment and you want this to also work for Chrome, you need to also come in and enable the Windows 10 extension in your Chrome library. Otherwise, Chrome doesn't understand everything that the device can do. So it uses this Windows 10 extension to pass those device-based credentials and those certificates to that device. So if you're testing with Chrome, make sure you do that. For the most part, pretty easy, pretty great. Now let's look at what happens on a unmanaged device, such as this. So let's go ahead and sign in with Jeff's credentials. And away we go. So here I am trying to sign into the thick client for this user account. And in this case, right, we're going to go ahead and sign in. Oh, I forgot I was testing, passwordless sign in for this user. So we're going to go sign in with passwordless authentication and away we go. So once I get that authenticator app accessed, you'll see I'm on thick client. Can't do it, can't get here from here. And it's going to give the end user options to help remediate, such as enrolling this device. If you want people to self-remediate, you can come in and put in controls like, allowing them to onboard their devices themselves. If that's something you want to do. If you don't want to do, please make sure you put in some MDM controls that control who is allowed to enroll your devices, and you're good to go from there. So that's going to be the same experience for all of the thick clients. So Outlook, Teams, OneDrive Sync, SharePoint Sync, anything that's a thick client, that desktop app, this is what the end user should get in that scenario, and then they can't keep accessing it. But what about, incognito browsers, right? What about not the browser-based session? So in this case, I'm going to use my normal computer and I'll show you what happens in this scenario. So if Jeff, in this case, is trying to access outlook.microsoft.com, what is his experience going to be on that non-managed device? And again, passwordless authentication, really cool capability here to, quickly allow you to sign in with the Authenticator app and number match. And in this case, Jeff is allowed to continue access in that web-based session. You saw previously we had that allowance for browser-based, but we did the session control policy in here, and this is what the end user gets. Instead of just being allowed to access out Exchange Online or SharePoint or whatever app that you want, third party is supported, you're going to get a redirect here into this captured portal. So you have that option. You can disable that capability for the end user to have that pop up here. You don't have to have them show that and hit OK every time. But if you like that, you can keep it. And then what's happening is that instead of accessing outlook.office365.com, you'll see here in the URL, they're accessing outlook.office.com.mcas.ms. And that's the Defender for Cloud App name. It's the formal URLs for it. MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security, previous name of the product. But end user, for the most part, can do what they need to. If I need to respond to this email, I can. I can open up Teams. I can open up SharePoint. I can do my day-to-day jobs in the cloud version. But if I come in here and try to download this file, well, I'm going to get a block signal as I try to download it. That's not allowed, right? And that is a really nice set of controls that you can put in place for this to make sure that we're limiting that options for those end users or putting in some compensating controls for it. And again, this is all about mitigating those risk scenarios and having that be put in place. Couple of final notes that I did want to give you on this set of policies is that this is a good set of policies, but maybe even a great set of policies, but it's not a perfect set of policies that, are going to solve all problems in the world. I would love it if you give it a try and see how you feel about it. Let me know. I would love to see, some results or examples of other orgs using this set of policies. I've used this quite a few times and had great success with it. I hope you do too. But it has some inherent gaps to it, and there's some that, I can definitely see in this environment, right? One of the ones I've been testing and experimenting with is, well, that's great for all those other device types that we targeted, but what about unknown device types? So one gap that you may want to consider in putting in place is something like, if it's not a device type we support, maybe consider block access to it, right? So my scenario is, I am testing on my end, hey, if it's like a Linux device, or if it's not one of these managed devices, or just an unknown device type, maybe I want to consider blocking it. And so as you go in and test, you might find some gaps like that. If you find something that doesn't work with the policy, let me know. I would love to learn from your scenarios and your gaps that you find in your environment. And I hope this helps you get your CA policies into a tighter state of deployment. If you have questions, I would love to help. I hope this video helps you out there. Please let me know how I can assist, and have a great day and stay safe out there.